kind of on that note, Jeannette, on the night of the election, I saw some smiley talking head make the phrase kind of offhandedly, and it's been made by other people too, that we are now living in a post-racial America.
Absolutely not. And I think, just to back up what Patrick was saying, is that is the danger, is that all of a sudden you have people writing editorials and you know, blogging and saying, well, black people should never complain ever again because they finally got a president, as if it's just the president of black people of the United States of America, when it's actually everyone's president to be. And I think that's one of the problems, that the election is something that humbles everyone, right? It's a moment, as Patrick said, for pause, but at the same time, by any means, we are not in a post-racial society. All we have to do is look at what happened in Nebraska on the same day that we all jumped up and down and celebrated this monumental election. We also voted for this initiative that banned affirmative action, mainly because people don't understand what affirmative action means, but because of some still residual feelings about race, so-called race privilege, reverse discrimination, all these code words that are used to basically demonize people who have been, you know, victims of institutionalized racism, economic injustice, social injustice, and so forth. So, you know, I caution even my students, don't think just because he's the president and Michelle Obama is the first lady that we're all of a sudden going to live in harmony, because that's not the case. We still have viable hate groups living, you know, are existing not only in Nebraska but around the United States of America, and there's still some resentment that this person, Barack Obama, was elected, and you see it in particular conversations in particular ways. I think there's still some euphoria, and so we're not getting a lot of that. But I've talked to people who are living in places like Florida and Arkansas and Ohio and all different places, Denver, Colorado, and there are places that people are not happy that this has happened. I mean, they're not violently angry, but they're clearly not happy. And so we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go in America.
If I could jump in there too, I would say, hey, look at the campaign that he had to run. It's one of the most brilliant political campaigns in 20th century American history, probably. But it also, I mean, as an African-American candidate, he had to run this so-called race-transcendent campaign. Rhetorically, you know, he positioned himself in an effective way, because he had seen how our politics has played out. And politics, race has been, for the last 30, 40 years, a very divisive element, usually deployed to divide people and through a politic of fear and resentment. And it is, as a result, it's very difficult for an African-American candidate to break through a certain level of support. Even Jesse Jackson in the 80s, at his most successful running for president, it was pretty clear he wasn't going to be the candidate and be president. And we have a host of elections in recent years showing the difficulty that black candidates have had in actually breaking through and winning electoral office when you need to bring in a decent number of whites. So he had to play, he had to soften the edges of his persona and in his rhetoric about, I mean, there are many either on the political liberal progressive left or in the African American community who would have liked him to be more strident maybe in speaking about race or issues of racial inequality. And you know, he could have done that. It's unlikely he wins the nomination in the presidency if he's that candidate. And so, and that is indicative of the limits among some white voters to which they will go in accessing a black candidate. So that itself, I think, indicates something about race. So he played those politics well. He navigated some very tricky racial cross-currents there. And by appealing to hope and this transcendent sense of race, on the liberal side of it, he did then animate many white voters, liberal white voters, who wanted to tap into what they'd like to think of their nation and themselves. And in a way, there's a psychology where they're, you know, trying to cast off the guilt and responsibility they feel for the centuries of racial inequality. So there's the psychological thing, I think, going on with some liberal white voters too, who with the appeal of Barack Obama. And again, we have to be careful that that's not just a cathartic moment for whites, a self-indulgent moment for white people, like, oh, he wins and this was great and I supported Barack Obama, this African American. There can be a paternalism in that. And if we don't get down to the hard work now of addressing the real issues and helping to make Barack Obama a successful president, as well as a successful first African American president, you know, then this is all really for very little, not nothing, but very little in the end, I think.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add on that. I think part of, you know, when I talk about the dynamics in my own family, I think that was one of the issues that was foremost in terms of dividing my family generationally and even regionally. And it's how well is Barack speaking to, you know, racism? And I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of people were hesitant to initially support him, because they felt that he was really walking a fine line. But I think as people understood more and more what the political process demands of a candidate, they started to realize that, you know, there was so much, as Patrick said, that he could say without jeopardizing the coalition that he was trying to build. And so by no means do we think that he will never address race. And he gave that, you know, important speech that not only spoke to African Americans issues, but also white American issues and others, that eventually racial justice has to come back into the conversation. Also, I don't think he's going to have the same kind of momentum in 2012. Because I think some people want to see that, and I think that's one of the issues why, you know, the African American community initially was a little bit conflicted and then came on, is they wanted someone who was really talking about what the African American communities were experiencing, particularly those that are low income. So it was just an interesting dynamic.